All right. So I started the meeting recording. The agenda's in the chat, and we can go ahead and begin.
Cool. Or do we want to do roll call?
Oh, thank you. Roll call. Aaron Artiega, Anna Beliakova, Alina DeGrado.
Present.
Thank you. Larissa Gladding is not here.
She's officially resigned.
Officially resigned. Okay, thank you. Mitchell Henke,
Present.
Montavious Jones, Kathleen Minnick,
Present.
Ben Teal.
Present.
Thank you, Ben. Barry Weber.
Present.
Kevin Cushell's not here. Stephen Owen.
Here.
And our public safety representative position is vacant. All right. We can move to the approval minutes from the July meeting.
I was looking at them yesterday. They looked good to me, so I'll move to approve last month's minutes.
Okay.
Second.
Great. Thank you.
I guess with that, we can get into the agenda. I know that our first item was National Ave, but we have DPW folks here.
Whatever you want to do, doesn't matter.
All right, we'll start with National Ave, then, thank you. So Barry made some edits last night to kind of put our main point more towards the top, which I think was an excellent change. But otherwise, the broad strokes of the letter are a lot of support for the project designed as is with some minor suggestions going forward. But overall, I guess commendations for city and WSDOT and everybody involved for making it happen. We want to have some discussion or questions on that, or if anybody has anything they want to say about the project briefly, since we're on the record and everything, more than welcome. Otherwise, it was suggested that in addition to the people listed in the letter, currently, we also add a couple of WSDOT folks that worked on the project, Deb Tarno and Robert Gutierrez. So if that's okay, I would like to add them as well to receive a copy.
We also want to add them into the appreciation at the end.
Sure, we can add them at the bottom too.
Mitch, can you do that?
Yes.
Also, splitting hairs, but looking at the bottom of the first page, when we talk about the concerns, currently the sentence says we strongly encourage the city and state to prioritize corridor consistency. Do we just want to put we encourage the city, or is that still something we feel we want to use that extra adverb there?
I like the adverb.
Okay,
I feel strongly about it.
awesome.
I mean, for myself, it's in the letter, but I feel very happy with the project. I hope we can see more projects from WSDOT and the city that look like that going forward.
Cool.
Is there an action on this item?
If there are no questions or comments, I would move to approve, or we can take a vote.
Second. Good.
We just want to do that. Is anybody opposed? No opposition. I think I'll send that out as soon as I can. Cool. Thanks everybody that took a look. I guess we can move on to the next item, which I think we'll have more discussion on. We have a couple of DPW folks here. The policy subcommittee has some recommendations on daylighting at intersections. So I'll hand it over to you, Alina, if you're comfortable with
Sure.
that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, do people have the like brief printed or should I share my screen?
I have one I can share around if anyone's.
Yeah, if you can share your screen, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so I went over the policy brief at our last meeting, and I think this meeting it would be nice just to have some more like substantive discussion. And I think I see Kevin with the traffic section is online, I believe. So that'll be nice to have him. But I can just briefly again go over kind of what our background exploration looked like, and then the possible recommendations that are outlined in the policy brief. So this is all related to encouraging improvement in daylighting at intersections. So really improving sight lines and removing barriers that make intersections more dangerous. And so there is a state statute which prohibits parking within 15 feet of a crosswalk. Of course, there are barriers beyond parking, but really this policy brief looks mostly at the removal or expansion of parking restrictions. There are, of course, other things like trees and bushes that can also, hinder sightlines. So the Wisconsin statute prohibits parking within 15 feet of a crosswalk. There are also NACDO design guidelines that recommend an extending parking restriction to 20 to 25 feet from an intersection. But those NACDO guidelines are not enforceable unless the city code were to be amended to adopt those extended parking restrictions. I did reach out to traffic operations to kind of figure out like what it looks like on the ground here in Milwaukee when extended parking restrictions are requested either by an alderperson or by a community member. And it is sort of complaint driven at this point. So they happen on a case-by-case basis, and it does require an in-person investigation to see, what the barrier is and the extent of the like sightline blockage. And so then we wanted to kind of see what it would look like to have more of a routine or regularity to kind of increasing these sight lines at intersections, perhaps without the need for the investigation. And so kind of zooming through, I did kind of look at what other cities' policies are, and there seems to be some alignment with those NACDO design guidelines in several other places. And so coming around to these policy recommendations and what might be interesting for our group to discuss today with traffic operations and others in the room are these three recommendations. So the first recommendation would be to amend city code to allow extended parking restrictions beyond the state statute of 15 feet. From the curb line extension to 50 feet from the curb line extension or extended. That's basically the line that the curb, so setting it back 50 feet from there, or 25 feet from the crosswalk, whichever is more protective, and this would be without investigation. And then a recommendation to adopt a resolution that proactively directs DPW to incrementally implement extended parking restrictions based on certain criteria. So this would be, for example, looking at the high injury network and maybe prioritizing intersections that are within that network or standardizing it for paving jobs. Of course, I think if we continue to move these recommendations forward, I think it would be helpful to come up with a metric of like, if we are prioritizing these within the high injury network, like about how many would we want to see a year? What's feasible cost-wise? And then the last recommendation being that we'd like to encourage protective barriers where feasible. These include things like bollards, bike parking, bike scooter share stations, curb extensions, et cetera, that kind of take the parking restriction to the next level in terms of protection to, in most cases, like the pedestrians that are coming into the intersections. So I kind of sped through it, but I know I kind of went deeper last month into it. If anybody has initial questions, like I said, I think Kevin's here and maybe others.
Yeah, we have Kevin and Tom here from
The two Kevins.
Oh, sorry.
He's from Traffic, and Kevin used to be here as well.
Sorry, I missed the other
No, that's fine.
Kevin in the call.
I just highlighted because Kevin answers the actual expert, so.
Is there, yeah, if you have any comments, Kevin, I guess, or did you have something you want to say, Lee?
Nope, I would definitely be open to other people's thoughts and reactions, comments.
Morning, everybody. This is Kevin Anzac from DPW Traffic. I think you did a great job summarizing what the city currently does. And yeah, I guess I don't really have anything to add more because you pretty much covered our conversation we had a few weeks back. So I'll just sit back here, and if anybody has any questions for us, glad to answer.
So,
Awesome.
Please, Tom has something.
so I would just like to add to the conversation. So thanks for reaching out to me to provide a little more context on what is in the statutes. You did correctly reference part of Rules of the Road, Wisconsin State Statutes, Chapter 346.534, which references that, or 5, which references vehicles are prohibited from parking closer than 15 feet to the near limits of a crosswalk. What also needs to be just part of the conversation in the reality of how parking regulations exist in the city is part of 349, which is vehicle powers of state and local authorities within the Wisconsin state statutes, and specifically section 349.13.2C is part of 2. I'll read that portion of it and then go to the specific portion that's applicable here. That portion states, except as prohibited in this subsection, neither the department nor local authorities may extend stopping, standing, or parking to areas where stopping, standing, or parking is prohibited by Chapter 346. The department and local authorities, with respect to highways under their respective jurisdictions, as described in sub 1E, may do any of the following. And below that, any of the following includes A through F, 6 different items. The one that's applicable here is C, and C specifically states permit parking closer than 15 feet to the end of a safety zone when such parking will not unduly interfere with the flow of vehicular traffic. So that part of the statutes is something you may commonly see where there are parking spaces closer than 15 feet. That is allowed per the state statutes for governmental entities within the purview of this. I've been here a little over 8.5 years. One of the first things I noticed is, in the first couple of years, well, we have some meters. There's some parking spaces that are closer than 15 feet. And it was an observation, and I learned this part of the code as part of that process. So let's describe it as a complicating factor here in regard to the consistency in the application of enforcement. So another piece of this in terms of, parking service, go ahead. Yeah.
So you're saying that the 15 feet is not absolute, correct? They're except at the city's discretion?
Yeah, honestly, I'm not, yes, I would imagine so. These were long historical locations where meters were put in decades ago, or intersections long ago where parking signage is basically put in, right? Time restrictions, not just metered, but general time restrictions. So there will be areas, in particular in the denser locations of the city. So for the most part, that's probably the downtown, right? Where you will see parking that is allowed within 15 feet.
But, and so there's nothing that would prevent the city from saying, okay, this is within 15 feet, but we no longer want that parking within 15 feet.
There's nothing that would prevent us. The practical reality is there's a lot of operational implications to
sure.
that.
Totally.
Moving signs, moving meters.
Yeah, I just mean from the
Changes, yeah.
statute perspective, the 15 feet isn't absolute. There are exceptions, but
There are.
we don't, like, we've made exceptions. We don't necessarily have to, or
Correct.
they could be undone yet with
Yeah,
other
absolutely.
implications aside.
Yep, and because you've got, what happens with many of these types of scenarios and situations is you've got different parts of the statutes which apply, right? So you certainly have one here, you have one here, and if one doesn't know that, they don't realize, oh, well, what gives the city the authority to allow something closer? That's what this part of the statute does. And then from one of the probably most challenging parts about parking enforcement. So parking services, as the parking services manager, part of my responsibilities is overseeing parking enforcement, towing operations throughout the city, and on and off street operations, metered parking, parking structures, and our night parking program. And one of the most challenging parts about parking enforcement is consistency and application of those rules and regulations and understanding of those by the public in general. And in regard to that, I pulled up so far year to date how many citations we write for Code 617, parking violation code 617 applies to this part of the statutes that we're talking about today. So a vehicle parked within 15 feet to the near limits of a crosswalk. We have written 4,544 of those parking citations up to yesterday afternoon. If you divide that into 229 days, which was applicable yesterday, that's about just under 20 citations a day. So parking enforcement staff routinely writes parking citations, and this is the entirety of the city, right? You're talking about large a large area, but this is a routine violation, and that's consistently applied. But as you can see, just by the nature of how often it's written, consistently not complied with, right? So you've got a lot of the public that, albeit we're all responsible for knowing and understanding laws and rules, we find in the realm of parking enforcement, just by the nature of enforcing the rules and regulations, that oftentimes people don't know those rules, even though they're supposed to know the rules, and therefore they don't comply. So the reality being, no doubt we're going to write citations of this nature no matter what we do. The issue with something different than the statutes here, certainly a code change, we want safety the same way you want safety. I can't imagine anybody in the parking or traffic world having anything other than safety being the utmost priority, right? The challenge from the consistency of enforcement becomes the public's understanding of those rules and regulations. And
more exceptions and more.
Right. And then what is there for them to know? Because in most places, there's other than absent signage, and there are some streets that have signage at a 15-foot proximate distance from the intersection. But I would say in the context of the entirety of the city, that's not common.
It's not always possible to place the sign.
And it's not always possible. So then becomes understanding of the public, and then the frequency of how often that.
Is the painted curbs like an official, like measured thing? I know even if it's not regularly applied. Like,
Yeah.
Is that useful?
Yeah,
to
where,
enforcement and the public as well?
yes, but one, it's not consistently applied. Historically, that was a venture that was undertaken when there was Compete Milwaukee staff available as part of collaboration with DPW for 3 years or so pre-COVID, between 2017 and 2020. So we had a couple hundred intersections that were commonly cited that were painted yellow up to 15 feet to a curb. But that collaboration has since ended since COVID. Those Compete Milwaukee workers aren't a regular, they're not something that's provided anymore. So now some of that is probably not even evident to the public.
Was there a reduction in citations following the?
You know, we did not study the differential. For today, I pulled how many citations we've written. Some of the citation information is going to be really tricky, especially 2020, because most of our regulations were stayed for the vast majority of that year because of COVID.
Sure.
But we have not done, I could simply go back and have pull data.
If you think it's useful, I mean, I would leave that to you though. I don't know.
It would, I mean, obviously, as your staff has time, Tom, it would be useful because what you're saying, what you're telling everyone is, we don't do that. We don't paint yellow curves.
Okay.
So anything that's out there is from that time period a few years ago when we had those staff resources available.
So that there were no curbs weren't
There are
painted
no
prior
curbs.
to that even?
Yeah, I don't
We
think,
can't speak forever, but.
Yeah, but like not with regular, like in the past 10, 20 years, like there was no like.
Yeah.
right, I think it was Kevin's newer than I, but he's
Yeah.
from Milwaukee area. I've been here 8.5 years. I was not aware that curves were painted. I had been told, and Kevin Ansek's probably been here the longest of us, but I had heard curbs really weren't painted absent any unique exceptions.
Mhm.
And therefore, we went down the road of if there was something available, and at that time, a collaboration with Compete Milwaukee allowed up to four, and during the summer, up to 4 people, and it wasn't 4 every summer for 3 or 4 years. It was 2 or 3 sometimes. It depended on them showing up, but they went out and painted intersections for 3 or 4 summers. I forget the number. I think it was a couple hundred or so intersections that the locations where we had historically written the most of these violations, and or that we had received a lot of complaints historically. We looked up in the system back then how many complaints we received, and then we used that as our way to determine which locations to perform that.
Right, plus violations is a win for everybody.
Is this somewhere we can be creative in our application of the Paint the Pavement program and allow interested citizens to take that on with?
It's certainly not what's envisioned under Paint the Pavement. We can.
What about as part of a
talk about
decorative
that.
crosswalk?
Yeah, I mean, sure, yes.
Crosswalk plus.
So with decorative crosswalks, we do try to make sure like the ancillary, like the white bars are in good shape, that type of stuff. So I suppose we could talk about that. I mean, just so everybody's aware that the paint that stays on pavement is quite expensive per square foot. So that's going to be probably like the most expensive way to do this for the community anyways. Yeah, I mean, so I would say, I don't think we're opposed to that. I would just have to check and make sure it actually works here on the tables.
And what's probably tricky about it, and we found this back when it was being done, we provided specific training to the staff who completed this. Cause they needed to go out and measure on each part of
Sure.
that intersection, the exact point of 15 feet. Mark that and specifically paint that area only, so that it was clear that we were consistently applying
Right.
that throughout all 4 parts of that intersection.
And the other piece to add would be in the places that this is going to be most beneficial, where parking is in high demand, is also in the places where you're going to need people to move their cars likely to actually do the painting. So operationally, there's a little bit of challenge there. It's not something we can't do, right? It's just a question of resources and funding. I think one more piece, and I apologize, I should have asked Kevin Anzek this before, but ran out of time to coordinate with him. But yeah, based on what my read of the state statutes, and Tom, you may know this as well. If we were to, first of all, I guess, based on your read, Kevin Anzek, can we do a citywide action, or do we have to put into ordinance every location we would want to do something different than 15 feet? And then the second question after that, and I'm more confident in the answer on this one, which is, can you confirm that based on state statutes, we would need to sign to notify the public if we are not doing 15 feet? You know, Kevin?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just
You're good.
thinking this through real quick here. Yeah, I would assume we could just change the ordinance to
Yeah.
say 40 feet. But the big problem in my head is that if you drive in from Green Bay or whatever like that, how would you have any idea that you can't do something different than state statute, which we'd have to put a sign up then? I would think, I don't think there's anything in state statute that says you have to do it, but I think in my mind, I would always feel like we're going to hang a ticket on a person's car that had no idea of this.
Yeah, and I think, so Kevin, I would agree, nobody here is an attorney as far as I know anyways. So we would probably want to double check, obviously, with the LRB, Legislative Reference Bureau, and perhaps with the city attorney's office if necessary, but I would agree with both of those. I don't think there's anything that prevents us from what I read in statutes, because there is stuff in the statutes around like speed limits and that type of stuff about how the city can or can't do things. And we actually had to get a city attorney's opinion on that when we were looking at speed limit reductions. But the parking regulations are pretty simple. The basic statute, which Tom's got right there, basically says it's 15 feet. And then the only way to get around the 15 feet is it says you have to sign in the 6th clause. So I think we can do this. Theoretically, we could get the council to say it's 25 feet, it's 30 feet, it's 40 feet, whatever we want to do. But I also think the statutes are pretty clear that we do have to notify the public if we're differing from the state statutes. And so that's why I'm not opposed to how you're framing it here, because I think that second bullet, the second recommendation gets at that, right? Like, this is not something that we can magic into existence, basically. It does have to be incremental just due to staff resources. But I am, this is a great initiative. I think obviously it's very consistent with the city's Vision Zero goals and complete streets. And so I think it makes a lot of sense. It's definitely something I've been interested since I got here. So I appreciate you guys doing the legwork and the research for me, because I just hadn't had the time yet. And so I don't think from a division perspective, and just so everybody's clear, Tom is not within infrastructure services. He's on the operations side of the house. So I'm just speaking for infrastructure here. From a division perspective, it's not something we're opposed to, but just, there needs to be an understanding that it is something that we would have to do incrementally, because the sign shop can't, thousands of signs immediately. So
Just out of curiosity, and thanks for that additional context, like what in building out this second bullet point that comes up with a goal for like how we prioritize where this would happen, like how much would the 4 signs at one intersection that would be prioritized cost? Do you know?
Yeah, sure. Generally, we're looking at probably $125 per individual sign post with a sign.
Mm-hmm.
So about $500 per intersection, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The current.
Yeah, without painting the curves. Yeah. I'm definitely not committing to painting the curves. I think that's a different challenge, because we struggle to paint what we do have.
My only question on this is because if we put in a a scooter station or a bike rack in that space, do I still need to sign it?
I think the state statutes would say yes.
Yeah.
Because I'm still using it for parking and you obviously can't park there anymore because there's a bike rack sitting there.
It would need to probably say no parking except scooters or something like that. You know, we do have signage like that.
We can repurpose the space somehow and still be there. It's a little bit cheaper. Plus it has more functionality if you can dock a scooter there or a bike right away. It's
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I like that solution, you know, to what Tom's talking about regarding the enforcement piece, right? Because
Right.
it makes, if it's substantially reduce the need for enforcement, because you're occupying the space with something else, which is why we, you know, why we put the scooter trails where we do, among other reasons, but, so I think that's great. I don't think we necessarily need to overthink the signage. The statute does specifically talk about vehicles. So we obviously should probably double check the definition of vehicle and what ends up being included in there. But I also think, this is one of those, like, don't open yourself up to an obvious challenge, but also don't spend so much time.
Our homework.
I already feel like our parking signs, like, we want them to be as simple and understandable to the
Yes.
public as possible. If we like throw on extra text that says, except bikes and scooters, blah, 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 blah. you know,
That's not there
what the
currently.
F's going on, right?
You can park a bike.
Yeah, yeah.
Without-
Well, I mean, we're not preventing that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess if I can like try to summarize, so anything beyond 15 feet would probably need to be signed, need to confirm.
That would be my read of the statutes, acknowledging that it is not my
But
job
that's-
necessarily
yes.
to.
But that's like the current
Statutes. Yeah.
best understanding.
Yeah, yeah.
Not confirmed.
Yeah.
There's obviously challenges that would have to be incremental. So is it worth, do you think, the effort to try to change city statute? Or is this something that DPW policy can say, all right, we're making the decision internally. We don't need legislation to necessarily change how we do this?
Kevin, unless you've got like an immediate, I'm trying to think about, you know, we don't want to put something into ordinance that is not immediately enforceable, right? Unless it's somehow, maybe we just say 25. Maybe we, like you're talking about, remove the need for investigation, allow the department to put it at 25 feet as long as it is signed.
You say up to 25.
Yeah, and so we could craft the ordinance such that it doesn't change city, like in the enforcement side unless it's signed, and then, but it also gives us the ability to make the change without having to go back to Public Works Committee and the council for every
Right.
single intersection we change that.
So you could do, you know,
Yeah.
15 minimum up to 25 or whatever, where signed.
Exactly, like that's how I think we could
Because it's required
frame it that way,
and
yeah.
it's narrow enough that,
Well,
And that would authorize the.
one of the nice things about having it in an ordinance is that when we do go to WISDOT for some of these projects, we can just cite the ordinance and be like, we need these signs, and then WISDOT
Sure.
will help pay for them.
Yeah, and that will help.
and so I mean, is there any deciding the distance with, since it is now optional, maybe want to go further than 25, want, you know,
Yeah, I mean, so a couple things. So I would want to talk with LRB at the city here regarding how we would craft that ordinance change. Obviously, we gotta, you know, I would look to you guys to probably get a council sponsor for that change as well. If they're on the Public Works Committee, that's even better. Or no, sorry, Public Safety on this one. Right, Kevin?
That is correct.
Yeah, Public Safety. And then, you know, I don't feel strongly. NACDO is recommending, I think you said 20 to 25, right, Elena?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, I think the bigger we make the number, the more we are going to get pushback in the areas where parking is
Yeah.
most in demand.
And just to clarify, the 50 feet is not like doubling the NACDO design guideline. The 50 feet is from the curb line extension, which is like the technical term used. And so that actually ends up being the NACDO guideline, the 50 feet from the curb line extension. Versus the 20 to 25, the way the NACDO guideline is worded is 20 to 25 feet from the crosswalk.
Yeah, and from the
Which
crosswalk
essentially-
is how
Yeah.
we talk about it. So, yeah, but that's a good point that we should frame it in a way that accommodates, there aren't that many, but accommodates the locations without a crosswalk at an intersection in the city. Which the combination of those plus on-street parking is probably pretty minimal, right, Tom? But we
Yeah.
could still, but it would still be good. There are some, so it would be good to include those. Okay.
So for our part, like, I guess we can talk to LRB and council person and stay in conversation with you, Alina, does that make sense? I don't know.
Okay.
This would be our first effort at.
Yeah.
Legislature.
Yeah, and I don't know if Kathy's on remotely today, or if she just wasn't able to attend, but we can certainly ask Kathy for her, for her assistance. So,
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
she's been.
yeah, she's great. So, yeah.
And I see Carl, you got your hand up?
Can we do any committee members first and then we'll get to the public?
Sure, thank you.
Alina, I had a question just about where you highlight other cities. Of the 3 cities you listed, Portland, I'd say was probably the closest to Milwaukee's population, right? I think it's about 600, give or take. Were there any other cities that you came across that you know of worth including that also about the size of Milwaukee who have also enacted, like Portland, additional legislation this way or ordinances?
Not that I could find easily. I think it's possible that they exist and it, just wasn't easily apparent. But that's a good point. I mean, San Francisco was included, New York City is up there, but those obviously are less relatable to Milwaukee.
Yeah, I did read this ahead of time, and I noted Hoboken's in particular is clearly reflective of their desire to squeeze every parking spot they can out of. It's like they're differing the near side versus the far side versus the opposing traffic because they're clearly trying to, maximize the safety while also maximizing the amount of available on-street parking. So I'm not sure we need to get that clever here.
Simpler.
Yeah, right. And simpler is better for the public's understanding too. So.
This is just top of mind because I have my second shortest roommate with me here today. When we're talking about the areas that we're prioritizing, I think like pedestrian head injury network is great. Could we also consider locations close to schools and daycares as being identified as explicitly priorities for this?
I think that makes sense, yeah.
I know, like, once you start listing things explicitly, like, it becomes kind of a Christmas tree and everyone wants to add their thing to it, but I think it's worth considering.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say, so we can certainly try daycares as a challenging one, just given the
There's
variety of daycare types across the city and how quickly they appear and disappear. So that might be
That's
more
fair.
of a challenge, but yeah, schools we can certainly look at, and we obviously have basically every school in the city has contacted us about something at some point. So yeah, we've got relationships with those. So.
There's already school zones and
Exactly. Yeah, there's all sorts of special accommodations for schools. Honestly, your biggest challenge with schools is going to get them when they're loading and unloading to respect this, because
that's a huge.
both the buses, which is easier, yellow buses is it's a challenge, but that's a contained group of people. The parents is usually the bigger challenge. So. Hopefully happy to pull over in the middle of a crosswalk and open their doors.
And stay there for a prolonged period of time.
That's nothing. That's required, right?
I help my schools pick up. Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Were there any other committee members that had a question or comment? Otherwise, I know there was a member of the public that raised their hand and we can hear from them. Carl, please.
Can you hear me just fine today?
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering if we can get some clarity from the city on what they define as a crosswalk, because we have crosswalks in the city that are not marked. We also have crosswalks that are not accommodated with curb ramps. So do you follow state statute, and in particular, how that functions at T intersections and complicated like 5-way intersections? We have a lot of those in the city. So would this also be removing parking from the far side of a T intersection? I mean, technically that might already be included in state statute. But I just want to know how the city's looking at this moving forward.
I think the simple answer is crosswalks are defined in the state statutes under 340-01-10. So I can read it if you want me to read it. That starts and states crosswalk means either the following, except where signs have been erected by local authorities indicating no crossing. A marked crosswalk, any portion of a highway clearly indicated for pedestrian crossing by signs or pavement markings, or B, unmarked crosswalk in the absence of signs or pavement markings, that part of a roadway at an intersection which is included within the transverse lines which would be formed on such roadway by connecting the corresponding lateral lines of the sidewalks on opposite sides of such roadway, or in the absence of corresponding sidewalk on one side of the roadway, that part of such roadway which is included within the extension of the lateral lines of the existing sidewalk across such roadway at right angles to the center line thereof, except in no case does an unmarked crosswalk indicate any part of the intersection, and in no case is there an unmarked crosswalk across the street at an intersection of such street with an alley. So that's, the city follows the statutes in terms of what crosswalks
I think
mean.
the
So,
summarized answer is yes for the most part. Like crosswalks would include unmarked crosswalks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
so
And
I guess
that's- Go ahead. Go ahead, Carl.
from enforcement, do you actually ticket people from parking on the far side of a T intersection?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, we often get complaints for all types of crosswalk violations.
I would say the opposite side of a T intersection is definitely one that many members of the public don't realize. But yeah. And that's another opportunity for, we are actually looking at those as opportunities for green infrastructure, depending on the grades, to kind of fill in the whole T. So we do have at least a couple projects that are going to go this year or next year that'll include that, and we'll continue to pursue that in the future.
Can you share one of the intersections just out of curiosity?
Yeah, we're working on the north side of Humboldt. I think it's Montana. I don't want to mess up Manitoba, either Montana or Manitoba. There's a street resurfacing project happening just for a few blocks there, and at Humboldt Park Court, and I think might be whatever's east of that, Quincy. So we are going to put on a T out on the park side, which is our area that is regularly parked up, especially during Show on the Hill.
Cool.
And so we'll be preventing that with the green
So
infrastructure.
Bay viewers, watch out for green
Yeah,
infrastructure.
right. Yeah, that's, you know, just one example off the top of my head, but that's the sort of thing we're looking to do, and, you know, working with parking to try to make their job easier by making illegal parking a harder thing to do, basically. Cool.
Yeah, because what's tricky about that comes back to the earlier discussion is the public's understanding of the rules and regulations. The public wouldn't commonly, by nature of probably what we may have seen in regard to this, doesn't necessarily understand the intricacies of these statutes. So they don't think they're doing anything wrong and park in this location and then get a ticket and they're upset by it and didn't know. So now they learn because they get a citation, but that's not the most service-friendly way for people to, you know, become aware of rules and regulations.
So many permutations of getting different parking tickets. Thanks, Carl. That was a great question and I think helpful clarification. Somebody else has their hand up. I can't see their name, but.
Hi, it's Mary Beth.
Oh.
Like maybe a quick note if things like this do go forward. In the areas that do have parking garages, I'm thinking especially downtown, it'd be really nice to maybe pair this with improved signage for the public parking garages. I have a really hard time figuring out where people would even park. I don't see a lot of public parking signs, so that is just maybe to helping with that note of educating people that they have options that are not parking on the street.
Good point. There are few public parking structures, but there are some. So it's
But yeah, to clarify, there's, you know, city-owned parking structures, which Tom's section is in charge of, and then there are also plenty of private parking structures that offer public parking.
Nice.
We did have that signage system that was installed several years ago now that was not super successful. Which was supposed to show, the amount of available spaces in those larger structures.
Down Michigan.
But actually getting that information accurately from those operators was a real challenge, because a lot of the signage was pointing to privately owned structures with public parking in it, or in them. I don't know, Tom probably has brain damage from that, so I won't.
Yeah, and just by the
PTSD,
way,
I'm not sure.
yeah, those signs aren't even used anymore.
Right.
Because there was such difficulty in getting them updated and having them accurate. And so now the signs are there and they really serve no purpose other than it's a sign pointing to potential parking structure.
I do think, the education and other options for on-street parking, especially when it's congested.
Yeah.
I don't know what strategies exist outside of trying to sign it, but I think it's an important point.
You want to get in that Cam, but otherwise.
No, I don't.
The point.
No, yeah, I would make the point. I mean, we work collaboratively with traffic. I don't think this is other than that effort Kevin mentioned, which precedes both of us, which was an effort through a CMAQ grant more than a decade ago to solve this type of issue, which has not been successful. There has not been any other initiative that I'm aware of outside of things that Bid 21 or other partners might do to put arrows about where areas are, but those aren't
21 being downtown.
Yeah, Bid 21 those aren't necessarily parking. Those are go to area, go to the third floor, go to downtown, go to the market center, that type of thing. So I think that's something that certainly would be something that could be considered for the future. But again, it takes planning and signage and collaboration and all those things, which, are wonderful, but take time and sometimes a long time.
Do we want to revisit the ordinance aspect now that we have an expert in the room, or do we want to move on?
We'll leave that to the committee. Yeah.
She can come back to it when we go back to the work group here later on.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of listening to most of the discussion. I did miss some of it. And so I do think that there are ways that we could craft the ordinance, to make it workable. If that's, from a policy perspective, if that's really what we want to do.
Yeah.
And I apologize for,
No, that's.
and I think I was that person at the beginning who had their phone unmuted because I couldn't figure out how to do it. Sorry.
It's all good. Thank you. I'm satisfied. Was there anything else that we wanted to ask? DPW.
Well, this is Kevin, DPW again. I guess I just want to share one thing with the ordinance idea is just so you know, when we enact any kind of change in parking, there's a process. We have to legislate every single act we do. And then we also inform the local alderperson of the change. So they're aware of it, because there's really only one thing I can think of top of my head that's an automatic is bus stops in the city. When a bus stop location is erected by the county, we come in and we take out about 80 feet of parking somewhere. And what that led to in the past was all of a sudden surprise. One day the owner showed up for their business at the corner and all their parking was gone. So Alderman Bauman required that County Transit come to Public Works to present a list of locations they were presenting for installation to see if there was any issues that Alderman Bauman wanted to talk about, or other council members with that installation of that no parking. So I think there needs to be some kind of component that the local alderperson is aware of what's going on in case, there's backlash from property owners of loss of parking. So.
Yeah, I think notice and communication is still an important aspect. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yes, correct.
Can I just interject there? It seems like something like a parking change could be added to the normal file that goes before Public Works, because there's every cycle there's a file that has parking and traffic control stuff. So it could be part of that file. That would probably be the easiest way to incorporate notice.
Sure. Makes sense to me.
So under that, Kathy, you're thinking that rather than the process we use, we would just include in that almost like a communication sheet that just notices the alder which changes we're making, if the ordinance allows us to change it without specific.
Right, I
approval from the
mean,
alders. Okay,
yeah.
if we change the ordinance to allow that, then we
Right.
would still, okay,
I mean, because DPW comes forward and says, we're putting a stop sign here, we're doing a traffic signal there, we're putting a no parking sign there. I mean, that seems like it would kind of fall under the same sort of thing,
okay,
assuming it's allowed.
yeah, right.
Thanks, everybody. Is there any other questions or comments? Otherwise, it sounds like we have a path forward, people to talk to, and work to do, but thank you, Evan here and Kevin on the phone. And Tom, very much appreciate your time and perspective.
Thanks for bringing this up.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
I don't think there's anything we have to vote on at this point or decide upon.
Look at it.
Yes, that is fine. See, the next agenda item was, if we're good to move on, if there were any final comments or anything, please speak up. Otherwise, we can move on to recent vacancies on the committee. So as a quick summary, Larissa resigned last month, or after last month. He was a voting member. He was appointed by the chair of the Public Safety and Health Committee, who is currently Alderman Spiker. So he would be the person to talk to nominate somebody to replace her. Kevin Kushel also left recently. He was at DCD, non-voting member, appointed by the mayor. So somebody would probably have to work with DCD to see who they would like to work with the mayor to reappoint somebody. And the vacancy we've had since the beginning, somebody from the Safety Commission at the Police Department, the Fire Department, the Fire and Police Commission, or the Health Department, and that person is also appointed by the mayor. I think the priority for me at least is the voting member. And so if we want to reach out, or if we want to talk about how we would like to reach out to people that would potentially be nominated. Be curious for any discussion there.
And just to clarify, it is Alderman Spiker, not Alderperson Zamarita.
I believe
I got my information from an Urban Milwaukee press release, so I mean,
it may,
that's what we had on Marissa.
I'm bad.
Relatively recently, when we had new members join the council.
Spring election.
Yeah.
This year.
Yeah,
Okay.
I can just double check real quick. But I'm almost positive it's Alderman Spiker.
Okay.
But not that I'm being put on the spot, it's like I'm gonna say the wrong thing.
No, we can double check, but it is the chair of the Public Safety and Health Committee.
I wonder if it makes sense. I know it's just one spot, so maybe we don't need to do the whole process again, but I thought the applications and documents that people submitted were probably helpful if the audience doesn't have somebody offhand.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure if that was unique because that was like the initial formation or how it should work.
I don't want it to be like overly burdensome for somebody to join the committee, but I do feel like it's helpful information.
Yes. So I guess.
It is Alderman Spiker.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we want, I mean, for anybody that's in the public listening is obviously welcome to apply and should reach out. Is that kind of how we want to do it? You know, include a short statement to us? Because I assume it should at least be somewhat facilitated by us to avoid the back and forth with
Letter of
Alderman.
interest.
Yeah, Alderman Spiker. Unless he, is listening and wants to lead the process.
Was there a list that was generated of people who were interested the last time?
There was at the time, yeah.
Okay.
So we could reach out to those people as well.
It makes sense to invite other people who may have not been aware.
Right.
Totally.
at the last round to also submit. I think a lot of interest would be great. Keep it simple.
And would that go to us or Alderman Spiker or both?
It's a good question.
I mean, ultimately, it falls to Alderman Spiker.
Correct.
He can choose whoever he wants. You guys can make recommendations, but he could, he could pick anybody. It doesn't have to be someone who was vetted by the committee, because that wasn't included as part of,
Sure.
as part of the ordinance of that.
Right, and I think that's correct too as well.
I mean, I can certainly reach out to Alderman Spiker and see if he's aware that there's a vacancy.
Yeah, if you would be able to do that, just like feel free to include me on that too.
I'm not saying.
Like if he wants us to kind of make a recommendation, I think we'd be more than glad to
Yeah.
field any applicants.
I'll offer your guys help, yeah.
No, it's, yeah, we want a full body. I guess, and as far as the other two, I reach out to DCD. I talked a little bit with some people from DCD a couple weeks ago, and they're aware of it at least. But they're also, I believe, also trying to hire to replace Kevin, so that was one of the focuses.
Does Kevin happen to have any recommendation of who might be a good fit?
That is a good question. I think I can reach out to Kevin. As far as the vacancy we've had, I'm not sure. Unless somebody knows somebody in the health department or fire department. Or the other organizations.
So the mayor needs to appoint somebody from one of those organizations?
Yes.
Okay.
But for both the DCD one and the.
Right.
It was very specific about the safety commission at the police department. I'm not sure what that is. But it's in the ordinance. It's not the police department, it's the safety commission of the police department, so. I guess, I mean, is there any, like, anything we want to do on these at this point, or just gonna reach out, share publicly that we're looking for a member and have them get in contact with us? We'll see what Alderman Spiker says. If he's interested in our help, then we can pass some names along.
Yeah, but if interested, send a cover letter to or letter of interest to Alderman Spiker.
I think so, yeah.
For anyone
For
who's
us,
listening.
yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
Although, just if it comes to the cover letters come to the committee, or, maybe send it to Alderman Spiker, but ask to be copied so that, so that you guys know who people are.
I think that would be great. And then we can have it with our pool of other folks as well.
Right. Because the broader you can make that pool of potential people, I mean, and those are just good contacts to have, if somebody's considering it, then those are good people to ask to use that, even if they don't join the committee.
A very good point. Cool. That sounds good. So we'll see what we can get into contact with Alderman Spiker and see what he wants to do, since it's ultimately his thing. But if you are interested, reach out to us and Alderman Spiker. Is there anything else we wanted to mention on this item? Cool. Otherwise, we can move on to Strategic Partnerships and Communications Work Group, of which both Larissa and Kevin were members, and so it's kind of short members and work. So the discussion is, I guess, do we want to keep it, or are there people that are interested in joining it?
I think if there's nobody ready here at the meeting to say like, I'm excited about joining this work group, we should just dissolve it and focus our energies elsewhere.
I'm inclined to agree. I'm seeing some nodding on the call. Well, virtually.
I think we're all building or trying to build strategic partnerships as we go with the other work we're doing, and it just kind of comes with it. So it's still happening, just albeit not an isolated work group.
Is this something that we need to vote on to close a working group? I don't think so. It's just informal, right?
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily need to.
Okay. Cool. Yes, hearing no
And
objection.
if you, and just for the sake of argument, if you don't close the work group, it's a work group that just doesn't have anybody in it right now.
Dormant.
It's, we've got lots of dormant committees here at the school. So, but then that leaves the structure in place that if somebody does have an interest or, then you can just kind of put them in there and you don't need to create it again. Perfect.
Sure. We'll consider the strategic partnerships and communications work group dormant for now.
Hibernation.
Any other questions, comments on that item? Otherwise, we can move on to work group updates. Guess we can start with targeted improvements.
Yeah,
You want to speak, Barry?
I could, and then Ben or Kathy, anytime if there's something you want to add, because I know we had some discussions like last week. Actually, yeah, Kathy, I just saw you pop up on the screen. Do you want to talk about the updates with the work you were doing?
Oh, sure. So we were just observing in our last meeting that with the bus rapid transit downtown and the bus only lanes, that it's not always clearly marked that bikes may use the bus lanes. And so we talked a little bit with Mike, and so we thought it would be actually a good September agenda item. So we'd like to just discuss as a group, clarify that bikes are allowed in the bus lanes, what kind of signage we might need, what would be feasible, and what we might do in the future for any future bus lanes, and how to make that clear from the start that bikes have sufficient bike signage to either direct bicyclists elsewhere or to make it clear that bicyclists may use the bus lanes. So that's kind of one of the things we talked about, but it'll be an agenda item next month.
I think the hope was also to have somebody from MCTS.
Oh, yes.
Sure.
So
Cool.
then we're hoping to have somebody from Milwaukee County Transit System, and along with any relevant people from DPW there to help us discuss it.
Sounds
So
good.
I don't know if I should, I don't know if Mike might, how we facilitate getting Milwaukee County Transit here, is that something that, our group reaches out to somebody, or is that I'm not sure what the next step is with that.
Yeah, we can figure it out. We can talk with Mike and see if he can or who we should reach out to if we
Okay.
should do.
Yeah, we can help with that coordination, especially with this good advance notice. Yep.
Sure. Great.
I mean, there were various brainstorms and all, but
Yeah,
that was the crux.
I think I don't know. I think Ben is still here and there was some discussion on our bike routes as well. I don't know if there's an update that you wanted to share, Ben.
No, I don't, no update that I can think of.
Sounds good.
And this is just, and forgive me if this is like, this should be after a meeting or something, but I'm still just wondering, and Kathy, this may be a question for you of, with the past recommendations for additional signage and improved trail crossings for the Hank Aaron State Trail. I was just wondering what's like the next step to help get that over the finish line, or et cetera. So this is what we, as part of the target improvements, recommended about, I think, 2 months ago formally to what's the word? Improve the trail crossings like at 32nd and Canal and 25th and Canal, along with signage in both along 32nd Street and 36th Street, Silver City.
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, what's,
Oh, well, this is more just like, that was something that, like, I know for me too, is like, we put that out there, and now I wasn't sure, okay, so what's next? Do we just wait to hear back from this person or that person of what can we do beyond just a recommendation?
Send it to anybody?
oh, okay. Well, if you have like a specific proposal, like you want someone to, to sign on for, I would contact like one of the alders, or like if you need a resolution, you would contact one of the alders and see if they would be willing to sponsor. And then it becomes, it becomes an item for discussion at one of the committees, probably Public Works is where it would be. And,
Okay.
depending on the nature of what you're trying to do. If you have things that you might want the alders to consider, I'd be happy to facilitate that, if you let me know.
Yeah, can we talk after the meeting briefly? Okay.
I don't think I had anything to share for targeted improvements. There's nothing else from us. We can move on to the next work group. Projects. I forget who's a member. I know.
We didn't meet this one.
And the last one is policies, which we had a long discussion on daylighting. Was there any other update?
We talked about one at a time. That's what we're working on.
So I don't know if there's anything to revisit there. I think that's all of the,
That new business.
yeah. So for new business, there was bike lanes was one that was mentioned. Is it okay to put another, or to put the daylighting policy on again? See where it's at next
Yeah,
month?
I think that makes sense. I think we can reach out to LRB this next month and then start crafting. I think the hard part is our policies group meets only a week before this meeting. But I think we can craft some things remotely and still have stuff to discuss at our next large group meeting.
Sounds good. Is there any other new business?
One more thing on the daylighting, do we think we're at a, like, far enough along with it to start like soliciting support from an alder that could sponsor it? Or do we think we need to let it bake a little bit longer?
I guess I would leave it to the policies work group to reach out to potential alders and DPW to see like kind of what, or and the LRB to see kind of what the final policy could look like.
Yeah, I think it's way too soon. So there's a lot of questions about, how you're gonna craft it and what it's gonna be, where it's gonna be implemented, that
Okay.
whole thing.
Fair enough.
Yeah, it's way too early to go to the alders because it's just, there's nothing that you can say, yeah, this is what it's gonna be.
Sure.
Sure.
Makes sense.
Is there anything else that we wanted to discuss next month, make a recommendation on, or otherwise? I think myself. Nothing comes to mind. But we can move to upcoming events. I think that's the last item here. Well, I guess I can start every month. Last Friday of the month, next month, or this month, next Friday. Critical Mass will be leaving from Red Arrow Park at 6 p.m. I think this month will be a South Side ride, if that's your thing.
Ending at the beach.
Ending
Beach
at
party
the
edition.
beach. There's that. I know, actually, there's a lot of events happening.
Yeah, Wheel and Sprocket has their gala next weekend. It's their 50th anniversary gala, and I think it's Friday, and then they have their ride on Saturday.
The Chris Cagle Slow.
Yes. So,
And I know that there's Bubbler Bash at Discovery World is next month. The Bike Fed anniversary is also next month.
Yeah, that's September 14th and 15th, respectively.
Okay, one more time. Sorry, that was Bubbler and
Bike Fed anniversary
thank you.
is Friday.
Perfect.
Big one coming up here next Wednesday, the 23rd, from 4 to 6, Sherman Boulevard, initial public information meeting. So we're just soliciting stuff from the public about what you might want to see out there. There probably won't be many designs or anything, because again, this is the very first one. 4 to 6 at Sherman Park. So next Wednesday, 4 to 6 at Sherman Park Boulevard.
August 23rd.
Yeah, I believe that project goes from Capitol to North. Yeah, it's a long one.
4 to 6 where?
Sherman Park.
Sherman Park. Gotcha. Anybody have any other events?
September 10th is the next tour to playgrounds, which is it's a crit in that we are only going to one neighborhood or one park. It's at Indars Park. I'm going to do loops around the park.
Good Enders?
Yeah.
Nice. Know the time? Morning, afternoon?
Watch this space.
Sorry, I've got a couple of events for active streets. Tomorrow, the Grant Boulevard Active Street is installing a temporary traffic circle at Meineke. The installation itself is going to start at 1 p.m. It should go pretty quickly. I will be there an hour before, so starting at noon, to collect some before data. And then we'll kind of be chatting after and collecting some after data just to see how that traffic circle is doing. And just as background for that, it's a very temporary traffic circle. A more permanent installation or semi-permanent installation is planned for later.
This is a rapid implementation of sorts.
Yes, of sorts. Some very, very temporary infrastructure. And then
Sorry, what is the cross street? Meineke and,
oh, sorry, Grant Boulevard.
right, thank you.
Thanks, good question. And then on the 27th, which is next Sunday, there is a rummage sale on the Pierce Active Street. And that is going to be on the 2500, 2300, and 2100 blocks of Pierce Street. And that's from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that's it for me for active streets.
Anybody have any other events? Public, committee members, anyone? Oh, Mary Beth.
Yeah, just a shout out to the many soul rolls that are happening. So Northwest Side CDC in collaboration with a number of other organizations. I'm kind of looking at their website now. Probably at least another dozen or 15 rides happening. So feel free to check those out. They're happening all over the city.
What were the organizations you mentioned?
So Northwest Side CDC is organizing and promoting a lot of them, but they're happening in collaboration with others, and it's called the Soul Rolls. So they're all sorts of different themed rides all over the city.
Thank you. Hearing no other events. Anything else anybody wanted to say before we adjourn? Potentially adjourn? Otherwise, I will move to adjourn.
Okay.
Got a second from Anna. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.